It was a crisp Friday evening in Los Angeles, and the stage was set for another episode of HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. The audience buzzed with anticipation as the show's signature theme music played, signaling the start of the program. Bill Maher, known for his sharp wit and unapologetic commentary, stepped onto the stage to a round of applause. "Good evening, folks," Bill greeted, flashing his trademark grin. "Tonight, we have a special guest, someone who has been in the news more than a Kardashian wedding, Congressman Adam Schiff." The crowd erupted in applause as Adam Schiff, the Democratic representative from California, took his seat across from Bill. Known for his role in the impeachment proceedings against former President Donald Trump, Schiff had become a polarizing figure in American politics. Bill wasted no time diving into the conversation. "So, Adam, you've been quite vocal about your disdain for Trump and his supporters. But tell me, have you ever considered that maybe, just maybe, you're alienating a significant portion of the American electorate?" Schiff, ever the politician, smiled tightly. "Bill, it's not about alienating anyone. It's about standing up for democracy and the rule of law." Bill leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Standing up for democracy? Or standing up for your own political agenda?" The tension in the room was palpable. The audience sensed that this was not going to be a typical political interview. Bill Maher's eyes twinkled with that mischievous gleam his viewers had come to know so well. He was about to push the boundaries. "You see, Adam, I get it. You're all about saving democracy. You had your big moment in the impeachment trials, you made your points, and yet Trump's supporters are still out there voting, protesting, existing. You really think calling them deplorable or un-American is the way to bring the country together?" Adam Schiff leaned back in his chair, his face hardening slightly. "Bill, I don't call people names. What I've said and what I'll keep saying is that there are fundamental issues with the way Trump supporters have disregarded truth, reason, and common decency." Bill smirked, nodding slowly. "Ah, yes. The old disregard truth line. But here's the thing, Adam, don't you think that when you dismiss people so easily it makes them dig in deeper? When you vilify a group based solely on their political choices, you're only reinforcing the divide." The crowd was hanging on every word, sensing the tension between the two. This was no ordinary political debate, it felt like a fight. Bill was throwing punches and Adam was trying to block them, but with each hit, the conversation was starting to escalate. "Bill, you know better than that," Schiff responded, a bit of frustration creeping into his voice. "We're talking about people who followed a man who literally incited an insurrection. How can we just sit back and pretend they're not a threat to our democracy?" Bill raised an eyebrow. "And what about the insurrectionists in Congress? How about all those Republicans who literally tried to overthrow the election? You're not calling them out with the same energy, Adam. It's easy to blame Trump supporters as a monolith, but do you really think they're all as extreme as the January 6th crowd?" The words hung in the air. Adam's eyes flickered briefly, but he quickly regained his composure. "There are extremists everywhere, Bill, and I've called them out. But the fact remains that Trump led millions of people down a dark path." Bill shook his head slowly. "Okay, but here's the crux of it, Adam. When you say things like that, you're not just going after Trump, you're dismissing millions of hardworking, decent Americans who happen to disagree with your politics. You're labeling them all as bad people, and that's a huge problem. It's alienating, and it's why we can't get anything done in this country." The camera zoomed in on Bill's face as he spoke, capturing the intensity of the moment. The audience, who had been clapping and cheering just moments before, now sat in tense silence. Maher was hitting hard, and Schiff was on the defensive. Schiff's jaw tightened as he responded. "I'm not calling them bad people, Bill. I'm calling out dangerous ideologies and rhetoric that have no place in American politics." Bill let out a sigh, his tone shifting to a more sarcastic one. "Ah, of course. You're fighting the good fight, Adam. But I gotta ask, if you're so committed to unity, why are you so quick to demonize the other side? You can't have it both ways." The audience reacted. Some nodded in agreement, others shifted in their seats, unsure where this was heading. Bill was clearly challenging Schiff in a way that few had dared to do in such a public forum. "Let me ask you this, Adam," Bill continued, leaning forward slightly. "How can you expect to heal this country when you spend all your time trashing half of it? You can't claim to be the better side when you're constantly putting people down." Schiff's expression softened, but his frustration remained. "I'm not putting people down, Bill. I'm fighting for what's right for the future of this country." Bill paused for a moment, considering Schiff's words. "Well, maybe what you're missing, Adam, is that what's right doesn't look the same for everyone. You might think it's right to constantly criticize Trump supporters, but for them, their beliefs are just as real, just as valid as yours. And if you're not going to respect that, then you're never going to bring anyone together." The audience sat quietly, the weight of Bill's words sinking in. Schiff was left momentarily speechless, his lips pressed into a thin line. Are you saying I should just accept their hatred, Bill? Just let it slide? Schiff finally asked, his voice cool but tinged with disbelief. Bill's response was immediate. No, Adam. I'm saying you should understand that people aren't just defined by who they voted for. There are issues on both sides, real, legitimate issues. And if you can't recognize that, you're just fueling the fire. The intensity of the conversation continued to build as the camera panned across the set. Bill Maher and Adam Schiff were locked in a fierce battle of words, each trying to outmaneuver the other. The audience was now leaning forward, captivated by the exchange that was unfolding before them. Bill took a deep breath and adjusted his mic. Let me put it this way, Adam. You and I are both pretty entrenched in our views, right? You're the Democrat who believes in holding Trump accountable, and I'm the guy who sees the flaws in both parties. But here's the kicker, when you spend all your time pointing fingers and demonizing the other side, you're not winning anyone over. You're just pushing them further away. Schiff leaned in, his voice steady but firm. Bill, we can't afford to play nice when the future of our country is on the line. Trump and his supporters are pushing a dangerous agenda that undermines our democracy. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. Bill raised a hand, signaling for a pause. Hold on a second, Adam. I get that you're passionate, but here's the thing, both sides are guilty of this. You want to talk about Trump supporters spreading misinformation? Fine. But why doesn't the media call out the lies on your side as well? Why is it okay to paint anyone who questions the mainstream narrative as a conspiracy theorist, but when it's on your side, it's just freedom of speech? The audience murmured in agreement, sensing that Bill was starting to land some hard punches. Schiff, clearly caught off guard by the question, shook his head. That's not what I'm saying at all. The problem is that we have a former president who incited violence and refused to accept the results of a free and fair election. That's dangerous. Bill didn't flinch. Of course it's dangerous, but it's dangerous no matter who does it. Whether it's Trump or whether it's the people who are now trying to silence anyone who dares to criticize the left. We've lost sight of real dialogue in this country, and it's not just Trump's fault. It's on all of us. Schiff's gaze narrowed as he responded. You're right that there's a lack of dialogue, Bill. But that's because we're dealing with a group of people who refuse to acknowledge reality. They believe in a fantasy where the election was stolen, where facts don't matter. How do you have a conversation with people like that? Bill smirked, leaning back in his chair. Oh, I don't know, Adam. Maybe by actually listening to them? Maybe by trying to understand why they feel the way they do instead of dismissing them as stupid or brainwashed. You know, it's a radical thought, but maybe if we had more of those conversations, we'd start finding some common ground. The tension was palpable. Schiff was visibly frustrated, his lips pressed tightly together as he wrestled with Bill's challenge. The audience, on the other hand, seemed to be split. Some were nodding along with Bill, while others were silently rooting for Schiff to make a comeback. But Bill, you can't seriously be suggesting that we should coddle these people. Schiff finally shot back, his voice rising slightly. We're not talking about just disagreeing on policy here. We're talking about people who believe in lies, who are undermining our institutions and making democracy seem like a joke. You want me to sit down with them and understand their perspective? What are we doing, pretending like their lies have any legitimacy? Bill's voice was calm but resolute. I'm not saying we should legitimize lies. But we also can't pretend that only one side is guilty of pushing those lies. Both sides have their fair share of delusions and exaggerations. The sooner we realize that, the sooner we can actually work towards something that resembles unity. Otherwise, we're just going to keep dividing the country even more. The conversation had shifted now from a battle of personalities to an ideological clash that resonated deeply with the audience. Bill Maher, ever the provocateur, was laying down his argument for the middle ground, and Adam Schiff, the staunch defender of liberal values, was pushing back against what he saw as an existential threat to democracy. Schiff exhaled, trying to regain his composure. I understand the frustration, Bill. I really do. But sometimes when you're fighting against something as dangerous as an insurrection, there's no room for compromise. We can't just sit idly by and pretend everything's okay. Bill nodded slowly, his expression softening just a little. I get it, Adam. And I'm not saying we should ignore real threats. But here's the problem. When you treat people like they don't matter, when you constantly trash them, you're just feeding into the narrative that we are us versus them. And that makes it easier for people to believe the lies because they think the other side isn't even worth listening to. Schiff looked at Bill, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. For a moment, the congressman seemed unsure of how to respond. Bill, sensing victory, pressed on. At the end of the day, Adam, we're all Americans. And if we can't even talk to each other without demonizing the other side, then we're never going to fix anything. It's not about winning the argument, it's about finding a way forward together. The tension in the studio continued to build, the cameras capturing every nuance of the confrontation. Bill Maher's voice had taken on a more measured tone, but the sharpness of his words still cut through the air like a blade. Adam Schiff, visibly shaken, was struggling to keep his composure. His body language suggested he was beginning to feel the weight of the conversation pressing down on him. Bill leaned in slightly, his tone softer but no less impactful. Adam, let's be real for a second. You and I both know that we've spent far too much time in our respective echo chambers. You in your liberal bubble, me in mine. And all we've done is yell at each other, throw insults, and act like we're on opposite sides of some grand ideological war. But here's the thing, people are tired of it. They want answers, they want solutions, and they sure as hell don't want to be told they're wrong for the way they think. Schiff opened his mouth to respond, but Bill cut him off, raising a hand for emphasis. Before you go into your usual democracy is at stake spiel, think about this. When you constantly demonize Trump supporters, you're making it harder for anyone to have an honest conversation. It's not about convincing people to switch sides, it's about finding a way to coexist, and right now, the way you've been handling things is only deepening the divide. The audience shifted uneasily. It was clear that Bill's words had struck a nerve with Schiff, and the politician was beginning to look less like the composed lawmaker and more like a man on the defensive. His face reddened and his fists clenched as he leaned forward on the table. Bill, you're missing the point entirely. Schiff snapped. It's not just about division, this is about the soul of our country. People who believe in Trump's lies are a threat to everything we stand for. They stormed the Capitol. They attacked the seat of our democracy. How can you pretend like we should just get along with them? Bill's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing with intensity. I'm not pretending anything, Adam. I'm just saying we've been here before. We've been divided along party lines before. But this isn't just about Trump supporters or Democrats. This is about how we talk to each other, how we listen to each other, and whether we're willing to understand why people think the way they do. And right now, you're not doing that. You're just labeling them as evil, and that's not going to fix anything. Schiff shook his head, incredulous. So, you're saying we should just understand these people? You're suggesting that we should sympathize with the people who helped incite an insurrection against our government. Bill's eyes gleamed as he leaned back in his chair, clearly prepared for the challenge. No, I'm not suggesting we should sympathize with insurrectionists, Adam. But I am saying that it's dangerous to throw an entire group of people into the same category just because of their political beliefs. You know as well as I do that not all Trump supporters are violent extremists. Some are just regular folks who feel left behind, who feel unheard. And you dismissing them as lost causes or enemies of the state is only going to make things worse. The studio was silent, the air thick with tension. Bill had driven the point home in a way that was impossible to ignore, and for a brief moment, even Adam Schiff seemed uncertain. Bill, Schiff finally said, his voice quieter now, I understand your point, but you have to realize that we are dealing with a party, a movement that has abandoned truth in favor of power. I'm not just criticizing them for their beliefs, I'm criticizing them for what they've done with those beliefs, how they've used them to tear apart our democracy. Bill's eyes softened slightly and he nodded slowly. I get it, Adam. I really do. But the problem is, when you refuse to even acknowledge the humanity of the other side, when you treat people as if they don't matter just because they support a different political figure, that's where we lose the plot. It's not just about Trump or the election, it's about what comes next. What kind of country do we want to be? One where we can't even talk to each other, or one where we can find common ground despite our differences? The silence in the studio was deafening as Schiff processed Bill's words. It was clear he was struggling with the complexity of the argument. Bill Maher had done what few others dared to do. He had challenged Adam Schiff's core beliefs and forced him to reckon with the consequences of his rhetoric. After a long pause, Schiff finally spoke. I think you're asking a fair question, Bill. But it's one that's hard to answer when you're dealing with a political movement that doesn't play by the same rules. How do you find common ground with people who refuse to accept the truth? Bill's voice was steady but laden with a quiet urgency. Maybe the first step is realizing that not everyone who disagrees with you is evil. Maybe we start by trying to understand why they feel the way they do, and stop labeling them as enemies. If we can't do that, then we're just as bad as the people we criticize. The audience seemed to breathe collectively, many nodding in agreement. The debate had gone from a heated political exchange to a larger discussion on the nature of democracy itself. Bill looked directly into the camera, his voice filled with conviction. Folks, we've got to start having these conversations. Not the kind of conversation where we throw insults, but the kind where we listen. The kind where we look at each other as human beings. Otherwise, we're doomed to keep tearing each other apart. As the debate wound down, the atmosphere in the studio was electric. Bill Maher and Adam Schiff sat across from each other, the tension still hanging in the air, but the conversation had shifted from the heated rhetoric of the past hour to something more reflective. The audience, who had been on the edge of their seats throughout the exchange, now seemed to be digesting the weight of what had been said. Bill, ever the sharp-witted host, leaned back in his chair, surveying the room with a knowing look. Well, Adam, he said with a smirk, I think we've made our point. We might not agree on everything, but I think we can agree on this. Something has to change. Because if we keep going down the path we're on, it's only going to get uglier. Adam Schiff exhaled slowly, his posture slightly slumped as if the weight of the conversation had finally caught up with him. He glanced at Bill, and for the first time in the conversation, there was a hint of respect in his eyes. You're right, he said quietly. The divisions are growing, and we're running out of time to fix it. Bill raised his eyebrows. See? Now, that wasn't so hard. The audience chuckled, and even Schiff couldn't help but smile. There was a certain irony in the moment, two men who had spent the better part of an hour clashing on national television now finding themselves agreeing on the need for change, even if they had very different ideas about how to get there. The camera zoomed out and Bill's voice took on a more serious tone. Look, folks, at the end of the day, we all want the same thing, a better future for this country. But we're not going to get there by pretending the other side doesn't exist. We have to listen, we have to talk, and we have to find a way to work together. Otherwise, we're just going to keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again. Bill turned back to Schiff, offering him a rare moment of solidarity. Adam, I appreciate you coming on and having this conversation. It's not easy to sit across from someone who doesn't always see eye to eye with you. But that's the kind of dialogue we need right now. Not just the shouting matches, but real, honest conversations about where we go from here. Schiff nodded, his earlier defensiveness fading into something more measured. I agree, Bill. And I'll admit, this conversation has been harder than I expected. But that's the problem, isn't it? We're so quick to turn everything into a fight that we forget why we're fighting in the first place. It's not about winning or losing, it's about making sure this country works for everyone. The audience erupted into applause, and for the first time during the entire debate, the two men on stage shared a genuine moment of mutual understanding. It wasn't a resolution to the deep divide in American politics, but it was a step forward. A sign that even the most entrenched political figures could find common ground if only they were willing to listen. As the applause died down, Bill Maher closed the segment with a final thought. Maybe, just maybe, this is what we need. More people willing to sit down, have the tough conversations, and not let their egos get in the way of progress. So, let's keep talking, America. Because we're all in this together whether we like it or not. The cameras began to fade out, but the words lingered in the air, resonating with the audience long after the show ended. This wasn't just a typical political debate, it was a call to action, a reminder that despite all the noise and chaos, there was still hope for real dialogue in America. As the credits rolled, the viewers at home were left with a profound sense of reflection. For many, the conversation had sparked something inside them, a desire to engage more thoughtfully with the issues facing the country, to challenge their own biases, and to seek common ground with those they disagreed with. Bill Maher had always been known for his boldness, his irreverence, and his sharp wit. But on that stage, in front of millions of viewers, he had delivered something far more important, a powerful reminder that, in the end, we are all Americans, and it is only by understanding one another that we can begin to heal the divisions that threaten to tear us apart.